Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all those around the world tuning in. My name is Max. This is Scott. We're from
Hello.
General Games, and today we're interviewing Alex Davy,
That guy.
the brains behind Star Wars Legion, and a huge advocate for Star Wars X-wing as well. Alex Davy did come in and assisted with that game, pretty huge, which was pretty cool. But hello, Alex, how we doing?
Howdy, howdy. Happy to be here.
That's good. So we've got a couple of questions that we're going to dive straight into the wonderful world of Legion with. And so first of all, how is life at FFG at the moment? Obviously, we know world's a bit of a shambles at the moment, but you guys are still playtesting, still getting things out on time, which is awesome. We got Clan Ren soon coming around the corner and things like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's strange days we're living in for sure. The whole miniatures studio has been working at home since early March.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I've been playing games in my basement, working out of my bedroom. It's a bit of a different experience. Fortunately, we have a lot of video calls, and I've always interacted with my playtesters through our forums.
hmm
So we've been able to keep on schedule, and we've been able to like continue doing the work we do. But it's definitely a different atmosphere. I haven't physically been to an office in
Yeah.
4 months. It's been a while.
And game
So
design's
it's a
going to
bit
be difficult when you can't be there with the other people, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the things that makes tabletop gaming so appealing is that personal connection. And it's a really challenging time to achieve that right now. And I think a lot of people are really, really hungry to, just have that camaraderie and to,
Mm.
see a friend physically across the table I mean, I don't think I've played an in-person minis game in, again, like 4 or 5 months. And that's probably the longest I've ever gone in my life without doing that.
That's pretty responsible of you.
I got my first game in a couple months, literally the Sunday that just passed.
Yep.
So about 4 days ago, 5 days ago.
That'll be your last for a while.
And that was my last for a while as well.
We're going
apparently.
back into lockdown down here.
Yeah, we've got 6 weeks worth of lockdown here. But I always thought that miniatures games is actually, funnily enough, one of the ones where you can social distance pretty well. You stay about 1.5 meters away from your opponent. You only really touch your miniatures as well.
Yeah, you just lob the dice from afar.
Maybe we need to design some extra long movement tools and range rulers for the social distancing version of Legion. Just make every range band, 2 feet instead of 6 inches, and then you're in business.
That's good to hear you guys are still trucking on pretty well. So in saying that, we're talking about character design is something that always is coming up with our players and things like that. Where you get inspiration. I was saying before that Boba obviously has, multiple weapon outlets on his pips. Where do you guys get those inspirations? How do you kind of create that feeling of the character you put on the table really is that character they would be in the Star Wars universe?
Oh, that's a good question, and definitely a big part of the initial design of Legion was to make sure that we had enough levers to pull, dials to twiddle, buttons to push, just mechanical things within the rule set that allows us to really get that kind of individuality across. Command cards are a huge part of actually showing, what a character is capable of. And so, when designing the game, we started with some of the core original trilogy characters, Vader, Han, Luke, Leia.
Yeah.
And we really tried to get across in their rules, their keywords, their unit cards, and their command cards, a real sense of what kind of leaders they were, what their skills allowed them to do. And once we had that groundwork established, then it just sort of becomes, the more characters enter the game, the more incumbent it is on us to like figure out what makes them special. So, Obi-Wan is the, I don't know, fourth or fifth Force user in the game, but he's got to feel like Obi-Wan, defensively minded,
Yeah.
sort of excellent duelist. He's got to have some of the things from the films that make him who he is. And so ditto anybody we do. But what's awesome about that is we have all those mechanical things that we can tweak and adjust and play around with. from a game design perspective, and then from a just an inspiration perspective, every character we do has all this wonderful source material that we can draw on.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier when we were talking, you mentioned Boba Fett and the fact that he has his command cards are weapons. Well, his nature is to be sort of a Swiss Army knife, and we've sort of seen that explored even further in the Mandalorian TV show, where you can really customize your kit. In Rebels, we see Sabine. So in that sense, it's really easy. Carl, I got a big old shaggy dog here. Carl, come here.
You got a cat too.
We got the cat in the back
over your left shoulder.
I'm gonna let you guys say hello to my hound doggy, and then I'm gonna put him inside.
Oh, that's such a cute.
This is Comrade Carl Barks. He's a good boy, a loud boy. Hang
My
on,
partner
just
would be so jealous. She's desperate for a puppy right now.
Big floof. Yeah, we got a zoo going on over there.
Yeah. Out in the wild as well, with all the plant life and things like that on the decking. They must be very, very well loved pets.
if you can hear, there's like a playground right behind my house and screaming children right now. So perhaps not the ideal.
It's
not
fun.
the ideal call, but hey, at least you get to look at this cat in the background.
You've got so much in the universe of Star Wars, right? Like there's so much source material from Mandalorian. You're saying Rebels as well. Clone Wars finally getting their last season as well.
Yeah, finally.
Which Scott hasn't stopped talking about it at all. He's obsessed with that.
The whole time it was off the air, I was still talking about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff makes it easy for us. You can reference specific events. Oftentimes, the films or the cartoons will have very specific war gear or equipment that you can try to turn into game mechanics. So our goal is always twofold. One, we want to create a fun, interesting mechanical experience. So when you play that unit, it's it brings some new tools to the table. You have new strategies that you can pursue. It keeps the game fresh and lively from a mechanical standpoint. And then our second, equally important goal is it's got to feel like that character. It's got to feel like Star Wars. It's got to feel right. But the cool thing about Star Wars is that, especially, post Disney acquisition, the content has just exploded.
Yeah.
So we can draw from so many different places, and not to get too like Marshall McLuhan, the media is the message kind of thing, but when you pull a character from a first-person shooter, those mechanics are going to feel kind of like a first-person shooter. So Iden Versio is, unlike many other Imperial commanders, she leads from the front. Yeah. She does a lot of the work herself, because as you play through Battlefront, which we did, she's always in the thick of it, personally getting things done, and therefore her mechanics can kind of follow that idea as well. So we're really, honestly, we're spoiled for choice when it comes to a lot of this stuff, and that's we kind of just let that drive to an extent.
Well, I've got to commend you guys on that as well, because with the new releases, with Clan Ren coming out, and you're getting kind of the infamous helmets involved in there, with new clone troopers as well, you're actually giving these customizations of clone faces and things like that, which is really cool. So you're giving these players that true feeling of what they want in their characters. Even with Iden, I played a game on Sunday with her, and exactly as you said, my first move was, infiltrate, put it right in front, and she just sat there and shot at the enemy until they got close, and then the Seeker droid came out and zapped one of them into nothingness, and
very nice.
You guys achieved that very, very well. So I'm going to commend you guys straight away on that. That's awesome.
Some of my favorite parts of design is top-down design. Like, I'm much more of a top-down fan than bottom-up fan, and it's really good to hear that you're basically pulling directly from the source material and putting them into gameplay mechanisms. Big fan of that. So I've got a quick question in the chat. It says, the question for Alex, why no mustard t-shirt? I don't think I understand that one. There we go. I thought there'd be an in-joke there.
I blew it. Yeah. Jay Schlansky from the Fifth Trooper podcast, huge fan of all things mustard, loves it, can't get enough of it. So he's probably feeling a little bit disappointed that I didn't bring the heat today.
Oh, maybe next time. We also got Static Man 75 says, how many times have you watched Mandalorian, if at all?
At least twice. And then I'm sure I'll watch it. I'm sure I'll watch it some more when we actually get if we actually get around
to when,
doing some Mandalorian stuff. So
to talk about that universe, what's some of your favorite characters as well?
Oh man, I mean, I love bounty hunters. I love that whole corner of the universe. So I was a huge fan of the show,
Mm.
and just excited to see that part of Star Wars getting fleshed out a little bit more. Because for me, even as a kid, I always wanted to know more about those creepy bounty hunters that show up on Vader's
Yeah.
flagship. I want to know what their story was. I read all the old comics and novels and stuff, and they varied in quality, but there were some really fun ideas there. And I think from a film perspective, just like even the Mos Eisley Cantina, all those creepy
Oh
characters,
yeah.
like I love westerns and
Mm.
and sort of like space fantasy. And so the Outer Rim is such an interesting place, and it's really cool to see that being explored in like a full on live action TV show. So that was awesome. I think everybody in the office was just thrilled with the direction that the Mandalorian chose to go. So
Well,
yeah,
that
whenever we really like something, we're really excited about it because it means we can play around in that sandbox ourselves
does that mean
at
that
some
you get
point.
to kind of get a lot of input on the characters you put into the game, or is Disney a bit more kind of heavy-fisted,
Yeah,
saying,
to clarify, I've got a question chat that Max is
Yeah.
talking about. It
Yeah.
says, do you get to choose the units that are put into the game, or are you advised by Disney which needs to come next? Feel free not to
It's a
answer
little,
that.
no, it's a little bit of both, but it's I would say it's at least 90% our decision.
Cool.
Obviously, we have to run everything by LFL and by Disney.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes they have information that we don't have about what might be happening in the near future and what kind of thing would be cool to put in the game. And sometimes we'll try to pair a release of our stuff with a release of a film or something like that.
Yeah.
That
But
makes sense.
we are mostly looking at what's going to be good for the game. What are some really iconic things that people want? Um, there's some no-brainers. Obviously, you're going to do any major character that shows up in a film is an obvious choice,
Yep.
particularly if they have some battlefield role. So there's a lot of no-brainers, but then we can do fun stuff. Like I think we were all pretty on board with the Imperial Special Forces, Inferno Squad, and Iden,
Yeah.
because I think even before the game came out, even before like knowing really anything about what that would be, it seemed like a really like a cool unit with a lot of fun mechanical possibilities.
Yeah.
The Empire didn't have anyone sort of like the Pathfinders where they infiltrate and they're commandos and that kind of thing. And just speaking personally, I think those tie helmets are awesome. So we were just excited.
That's sick.
We were excited about those that character and that the potential for an Inferno Squad unit. So luckily they let us guide things, and they have a really wonderful amount of faith in us, especially at this point since we've been doing Star Wars games for gosh 8
Yeah.
almost 9 years now. It's been a while. Um, so luckily we have a really great working relationship, and they mostly let us sort of pitch them on what we want to do, and then they'll just say yes or no, or yes and or no but, or what have you. So it's really collaborative, but it's typically the mini studio that kind of drives the schedule and drives what we're thinking about.
Looking a
And a
little
lot
bit
of it
from.
happened a while
Oh,
back, right? Like we had plans in place for the Clone Wars factions from Go.
yeah.
So even to the
Yeah.
point where I left room in the unit cards for those specific units. So I knew I wanted a unit that had a horrible attack and a horrible save, for the B1 battle droids. And I knew on the other side. So if you look at the four, main units like stormtroopers, rebel troopers, B1 droids, and Phase 1 clones, you can kind of tell that I had that idea in mind from a pretty early point.
Mm,
Yeah.
for
They,
sure.
they all kind of sort of fill a complete circle when you look at what kind of unit they are, just based on their surge dice or their surges and their the color of their dice and all that kind of thing.
So you have basically unit archetypes that you can slot some flavor into when that opportunity arises.
Yeah, and not so much that I knew exactly what the B1s would look like, but more that I knew that I needed to carve out X amount of space on like the lower end of the scale.
Sure, that
I
makes sense.
I needed dice that would accommodate what you see in the films, which is those things, you breathe on them hard and they fall over. They're not a quality soldier, so you needed to leave some room down there for that kind of unit.
Yeah.
So just only in the broadest sense, but we do have, right now I think we have roughly plotted out 2 years or so of releases. So
Ooh,
that'll
that's exciting.
change. But like we are thinking very far ahead and trying
Right.
to have a really bird's eye view of how we want this game to be shaped going forward, which is
Right.
cool.
Yeah, so we're talking about the Baby Yoda release. We're talking about the Ahsoka Tano release.
Mace Windu, right? Please.
All right, let's move on to one of the other questions we have on our
So
agenda.
jump in, talk about the passing kind of dice and things like that. We have Brendan here asking about kind of the defense and offensive dice, the choices between 2 defense versus 3 offense, how the surge on the white dice is, doubling your chance to actually save. It goes from 1 to 2 out of 6. So if you could go back, would you change anything about that, or are you happy with how that turned out and how you can kind of balance those dice rolls?
That's a good question. I think I'm reasonably happy with it. One of the design goals for Legion was simplicity.
Yep.
And
We've said that a couple times as well. We've
yeah.
loved it.
So, when you're creating a system, the fewer variables that you have to muck with, the harder it is in a certain way to create variety. Obviously if you're using a tape measure and you have ranges that go out to say 48 inches or whatever, and your weapon can be, 7 inches or 18 and a half inches or whatever, you have more flexibility. But the price that you pay for that extra granularity is sometimes in approachability. And a 20-sided die gives you a lot of variables, but it means looking up charts, it means all kinds of stuff. So one of the big goals with Legion was to strip that stuff down to what we thought were the bare essentials. How many range bands can we get away with having? How few? And ditto for the dice. So the dice was really just an attempt to basically have enough variety but keep it simple. And so, the dice don't allow us to have, a unit that saves 5 out of 6 defensive rolls. Because it just doesn't go down that low. But I don't really miss having that because that can be a frustrating type of save when something is that difficult to defeat.
The game never ends, right?
Yeah, you want stuff to move. You want the that's one of the reasons that offense is tilted so much heavier than defense. You want stuff to happen.
Yeah, of course.
You don't want it all to go, turn on the game's over, but you do have to make sure that your offense exceeds your defense and you don't get into these stalemate situations. So it was really just about choosing enough to make the game tactical and interesting without needing 100-sided die or, in half-inch increments or that sort of thing. But it's funny. We did end up adding a 5th range band to the game because after we had played it for a while, we realized that having 4, just 4 and then infinite range wasn't enough granularity.
Yeah.
So we actually were like, well, the way that our rulers are built, you can just sock another one onto the end there, and that was a response to some balance issues and some fun flavor and fun issues where infinite range snipers were not necessarily a delight to play against.
It was a dark time for Legion.
I think overall I'm pretty happy with the range of options. I don't find myself wishing I had more stuff to fiddle with when I'm designing a new unit. That being said, I used to have a critical block result on defense dice, and I cut it from the design for simplicity because I couldn't think of anything for it to do except block pierce, and that would that would have been a meaningful result. But it's one of those examples of like, was it really necessary? And I'm still kind of on the fence about that because sometimes I wish I had that to play with. But other times I'm like, well, the game is simpler without it. There's one less thing that can throw you off. So I would say, am I happy with the dice and the movement stuff? Yeah, like 95%. It does what I wanted it to do, and it's flexible enough
There's always
I
that
can
5% of what if.
build
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
It'll never be 100%. Never, never, never.
When Scott and I first started playing Legion, we were saying we love the ideas of, it's you roll the dice, you attack, you hit them, now roll your defense dice to try and block it. Even movement stuff like that. There's no fiddling, there's no extras, and exactly as you said with math, you're not looking at, if I roll on a d6, 2 plus or 3 plus into my defensive, and then you have this and that and back and forth.
No
So
charts.
yeah.
I'm sick of charts.
I really like symbols. Symbology is something that we see a lot in board games. You guys do really well in board games as well.
Yeah, symbology and iconography, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good way to help explain it to people.
Yeah,
So-
and it's funny, because I was actually a little skeptical when I first started designing Legion that going with symbols instead of numbers really made a big difference.
Yeah.
I was like, surely we can just use numerical dice. That's not that big of an impediment. Once you learn the system, it's pretty easy to know what numbers you're looking for. But I actually was really surprised by how much removing numbers, removing even that very simple math, is just one more thing in between you and the immediacy of the action. And it sounds like it wouldn't make a big difference, at least sort of intellectually when you're thinking about it. But experientially, having symbols instead of numbers, it does streamline it just that little bit extra. And it's another thing that you're making. Your brain just processes it quicker, and you just look at the number of hits, you look at the number of blocks. You're not trying to think, okay, well, my guy's hit on a 3, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Even those extra split seconds kind of take you out of it a little bit.
It's more
And if you
immersive.
make enough of those decisions across the game line, it ends up removing actually a lot of the fiddliness. And so I was pretty pleased with how that makes the game feel. I kind of became a convert to, preferring symbols,
Well,
even
there's
though
an
I've been
emotional
playing
response.
numbers forever.
There's an emotional response between rolling the dice and getting the successes for yourself. And then when you block, you're also getting successes. It's not like I'm trying to stop you, I'm trying to succeed, you're trying to succeed. We're both trying to succeed, which is a good feeling for both players.
Yeah, that's definitely true. You're both trying to roll a thing that you want. There's less taking away of the other person's. Everybody has a certain amount of agency, even if it's just rolling dice and hoping they land correctly. There's something kind of primal about that.
There is.
When it's a feeling of control, even if it's not real control, because you get to roll those dice. You get to apply those saves and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Talking about that emotional feeling about kind of succeeding as well, I want to talk about actually the success of Legion very briefly. I want to talk your personal feeling of when we first started playing Legion. I had a bounty on my head. I had about 10 or 12 wins in a row. I was doing trooper spam with some speeder bikes. And it was just trying to get the game going, and I thought that after the Clone Wars release, and this is where kind of the diversity of choice really helped the game, where maybe Legion started off a bit slower than a couple of us anticipated. When Clone Wars hit, it just skyrocketed, and it really was that diversity of choice, I think, that helped the game quite a lot. So what are your feelings on that? How is that feeling as a game designer, seeing kind of almost a vertical, just spike in love for the game?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that it's caught on. I'm thrilled that people are enjoying it, and I think it's also my first fully ground up my design games. It's the first game that I've actually been a game designer on rather than a developer. Granted, I came on to X-Wing quite early, and I came on to Armada with the very first core set and had a lot of say in that design. But it's different when it's all yours and you're making all those final decisions. And so certainly there was a degree of nervousness when it came out. Like, are people going to like this? Is this going to catch on? But I was pretty happy right away because there was a really good response. But you're right. The game has taken off, I'd say, exponentially since the Clone Wars came out. And so that's really, really gratifying as well, because I think what you have there is, one, you've got faction diversity. Having more than 2 factions means it's just a more interesting miniatures game. But I think, two, you have a lot of people who grew up with the Clone Wars and with the prequel trilogy as their entry point to Star Wars. And even some younger people who grew up with the TV show. And I think getting the widest number of people. Like you've got OG, original trilogy fans, who saw those films when they were kids, and then you've got, two generations past them. You've got Gen Z kids who are excited about the game because they were kids when they were watching the TV show or when they were watching those prequel movies. So that's what's kind of cool about Star Wars. It unites people across this wide sort of range of generations, and so I think that's a big part of why the Clone Wars stuff caught on as well. And I also think it's just cool to have an army of robots and clones.
I
They're
love
more
clones.
I'm a robot.
they're
Man.
more appropriate for a war game. It's
Yeah.
actually a more appropriate era. You kind of have to you have to make some interesting creative choices for the Rebel Alliance to give them enough stuff to really be a credible, land army threat. So we've had to get creative and get inventive and that kind of thing. And that's what I love about the Rebels. They're scrappy, but at the same time, it's cool to see two factions, where they are huge militaries and they're engulfed in this galaxy-spanning war. It's a different vibe, and I think that appeals to people, to a different set of people. And then, of course, you can play all four against each other, which just leads to more diversity, more interesting games, more things you have to think about when you're list building, taking your army to a tournament, all that kind of stuff. So, I think there is a ceiling at which there's too many factions, but certainly 4+ factions is a great place to be in for a minis game.
Yeah, awesome. Talking about kind of like people growing up with the prequels versus maybe the old generation. I mean, I was a Battlefront guy for a while as well. I remember sinking hundreds of hours into Battlefront 1 and Battlefront 2 on the Xbox original. I think it was Xbox 360. Are you thinking of potentially going in a smaller scale narrative style play, similar to kind of we've got a lot of skirmish-based games that have 5 or 6 models on the table. Is that something FFG's thought of? And on the flip side, have you thought? I know there's a 1,500-point game mode that a couple people play, but going even larger scale, huge narratives. Getting your big walkers, your AT-ATs, and things like that.
That'll coincide with the AT-AT launch. It's definitely coming out, right? Guaranteed.
There you go. We always want to do more. I'm a big fan of skirmish games. I think one of the reasons that our department, the minis department, has been so successful is that we have a really approachable skirmish scale game with X-Wing. That's honestly what launched. If it weren't for X-Wing, there'd be no Legion. If it weren't for X-Wing, there would be a lot of different things about Fantasy Flight games. There might not even be a miniatures department without the success of that game. So to me, a skirmish game is brilliant because you can play it in half an hour to 45 minutes. You can put it in a lunchbox. You can take it with you. I love that kind of stuff. And I think there's definitely, there would be a market for it. There would definitely be, I think that would be a winning formula if we could figure out a way to do that with a small squad of Legion minis. It's also really thematic. Going on like a secret strike team mission is very, very Endor, very that. So, while I cannot say, anything with certainty, I can't spoil anything or really give you any straight answer here. I can say I think that's a really cool idea, and it's definitely something I've been going over in my mind. So that's as much awesome as I can say. But I would like to play that game, and that usually means I'd like to work on that game. So.
Well, kind of jumping on that, we might have to be scaling this up or down, but then do you guys have a rubric that you use for kind of the skills and things like that to add points? Because I imagine that can be, if you're going large or small scale, you can kind of utilize that. So, for example, there's cards that say, gain tactical 1. That's about 5 to 6 points or 10 points, something like that. Do you guys use an actual, system or spreadsheet to kind of utilize those points?
No, I am a bit math phobic, and and I'm very much more sort of an instinctive designer. Yeah. We did have rubrics and stuff for the initial batch of units. Did a lot of math to try to figure out the initial balance of things. But what's interesting about that kind of thing is I don't actually think it's terribly instructive, because a lot of stuff is really hard to quantify.
So contextual, right?
For instance, you can have a unit that's got good offense, good defense, seems like it's quality, but if it's a certain number of points and the way that it interacts with the game is a little bit harder to approach, it's not going to be an effective unit on the tabletop. I think we saw that with the ATSD with vehicles. Like there were certain numbers where that seemed fine, but the reality was it couldn't do a lot of the things that troopers could do. It hurt your activation count. So we basically had to reevaluate what the actual worth of those was. And so for me, I try to peg a unit to a similar unit that's doing well. If you look at what performs effectively in the game, if I create a new unit, I try to figure out like where does it sit in comparison with units that exist, and those units that exist, are they good enough? At their initial points value, are they actually performing or not? Because obviously not everyone's a winner, and there's always going to be some minis that are going to collect a little dust in your carrying case until we tweak the points and what have you. So I think it's much more about learning as you go along, and then adjusting to the things that did not meet your expectations or meet your formulas, rather than having some sort of math model that tries to predict everything. I just don't think it's truly possible. Maybe with a supercomputer and a much better programmer, but I think it's a lot easier to just sort of use the things that already exist as a yardstick and try to build on successes and avoid what made units in the past less successful. And then the fact that we could just adjust things every year is huge, because it means we don't have to do it perfectly out of the gate. We can just make sure we can focus a lot more on making sure the unit is fun and making sure that the unit is going to be rewarding to play and play against. And we try to get the points right, of course, and we do test things extensively. But if they are off, luckily we have an escape hatch and we can bring things back into contention. And I think we've seen that already with our first points adjustment, which was pretty conservative, but it did bring vehicles back into play. I think we're seeing stuff like the AAT and the Saber tank are much more viable than those initial vehicles. And it's because we had that knowledge and we had that experience going into those designs. We didn't have when we were designing stuff before the game existed. It's always tough to design for a game that nobody's really played yet. You're not going to have nearly the success as you do later on when everyone's better at the game and understands what makes good.
Do you guys look at a lot of the tournament scenes and things like that was happening? I know CanCon in Australia had a good chunk of players. I would have expected a lot of players next year. I'm not sure if that's going to go ahead.
It's not going to go ahead.
But do you guys utilize that kind of tournament information to see what really is performing well and what you can change? As you were saying, it sounds like you guys are prepared, whilst you don't necessarily want to, but prepared to make those adjustments to play to characters, adjustments to points and things like that to really bring things in line.
Yeah, I actually expect to make adjustments at this point. I mean, I've been doing this for long enough that I know that however skilled you think you are, you're going to miss the mark here and there. And I think, one of the cool things is, like X-Wing 2nd Edition, that was built into the game from the get-go. We are going to make periodic adjustments to keep things interesting, to keep certain ships from becoming oppressive, to keep the game as fun and fair as we possibly can. And Legion was designed just a little bit before 2nd Edition X-Wing. So we didn't have some of the things like no points on the cards and that kind of thing. Yeah. And we also take a little bit more of a casual approach towards Legion because it's a tabletop game. It's a hobby game. I would say that the majority of our players are kitchen table players, friendly casual players, maybe showing up at the game store, but not like coming to tournaments necessarily. Or if they do, it's for fun. So I think that Legion has taken a bit of a more relaxed approach to that kind of thing. That's why we only do a balance shift once a year. It's why we try to put the emphasis on, exploring some of the more hobbyish sides of things. But I still think it's important that, especially if it's an iconic unit, if it's a unit that people really identify with, it's important that unit be at least somewhat effective in the game, or it'll be disappointing to a lot of people. So, I think it would be kind of a bummer if the ATST was just nobody ever took it. It had no
It's so
role
iconic.
in the game. Yeah, so I think you kind of have to have this balancing act, but you also don't want to release a 25-page, single space list of changes, where every single thing in the game goes up or down by a point. So it's just it's a balancing act. It's you try to make enough significant changes that hopefully every unit has a place without going overboard, especially without app support or without anything specific that will just do it for you.
Are we going to see an app in the future by chance? Because that'd be pretty cool. I'd like a little app where you can see some FAQs and chats and build list builders or things like that, maybe.
It's definitely a cool idea. As with everything else, it's just a matter of bandwidth. Every single thing we do pulls from something, and so that's one of those questions where it's like, is it worth putting our resources towards an app, or is it worth putting our resources towards a new game, or a new campaign format, or any other thing we might want to do? And luckily for Legion, there's a ton of great third-party list builders and that sort of thing that are kind of filling that need. And two, with Legion, the points are on the cards, so there's always at least a version of the game that you can play right out of the box, which I actually think is important for a hobby game. You don't want people to necessarily have to go to their computer right away. It's nice to be able to just open up a box that has 2 little armies in it and start rolling dice right away. I think there's definitely something to be said for that.
So, talking about kind of focusing your resources and things like that, this is a very important, close to my heart question. When's the support pack for Cad Bane going to come out where we have 6 to 40 hats, so I can have all my droids having hats on the battlefield? Because it's very, very important.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to have to wait till Lando comes out, because we're going to want to release, an accessories kit with capes as well. Hats, capes, scarves. It'd be nice to give Jyn Erso a couple different scarves. So we just want to wait until we can really do that kit justice.
I'd pre-order about 100 of those just so.
I think there's 2 hats in the Cad Bane kit. I think we threw an extra hat in there. I don't know why, but that might be good news for you.
It's a weapon option, right? He throws it.
Well, because he's a bounty hunter, right? He gives someone his hat, and he's not there to fight or to get points for the droids or anything. He just wants his hat back.
It's so he can
That's
tip
everything. He's just going to point at that person. I want my hat. You got my hat. It's mine. Look, Alex, we really appreciate the time here. We're going to probably, I think, look towards wrapping up. We've got another quick question, though, just in regards to the Australian team. We have a squad called the Bantha Squad that apparently you've heard of. They're an old X-Wing crew. They love Legion. They've actually come out with a full magazine. So have you had a chance to kind of squiz at that or gotten opinions on it?
I did. What an immensely flattering publication. I remember reading the introduction about how much fun it was to page through those old white dwarves. I played some games you may or may not have ever heard of, Warzone and Chronopia, when I was 13 and 14, and they had a couple magazines. Yeah, that blank look. I was a '90s kid, and I was not playing the GW games. I was playing the hipster games. Those are long since defunct, but I remember flipping through those magazines and getting really excited about the terrain and all the hobby articles and stuff. So the fact that there's a fanzine for something that I've created is kind of unreal. It's a little bit surreal, and it's very, very cool. And it's a really, really polished and impressive publication. So I hope there's an issue 2. I hope to
Definitely
continue reading it. Very
that's
cool.
That's awesome. Well, they're probably watching, or at least they'll definitely be checking out the VOD after that. So congratulations, guys. That is a huge success from Alex's point of view. So congratulations.
Also, Vader Yoga, not to like.
So look, we really appreciate the time here. Any closing thoughts or shout outs to people or
release dates for Darth Maul and Anakin
and Mace Windu, please. I want my purple lightsaber, please.
Just stay safe out there, people. We're not through this thing yet, and just be careful. I want everybody to get back to rolling dice, but remember,
Me too.
the Rona, she be real. She's out there, and just be careful.
All right, well, we've been Max and Scott. This has been Alex Davy from Fantasy Flight Games. Thank you so much for joining us today. And
really
if you guys like this video, do the thing with the like button and the subscribe and all that. It really helps us out. This will be on YouTube after this stream. Thanks for watching.
Really appreciate it, Alex. Thank you so much.
Cheers.